This is the Mixed Martial Arts Beat for the 5th week of April 2015. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. Great to be back here for another episode of The Beat. What a week it has been for the UFC, and they're now former, how weird is it to say that, UFC light heavyweight champion Jon Jones. An amazing week. We'll digest it all. There's so much to discuss, and of course a whole lot more. There's a lot going on in the world of combat sports. So let's get right into it. We have an interesting panel this week. I do believe this quartet has never been on the show together. No. So how about that? You know this man. This is New York Rick, a.k.a. Eric Jackman of the MMA Hour fame. That is the man with the shirt. Jeff Wagenheim of SportsIllustrated.com. And back in the saddle, Mark LaMonica of Newsday. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me, Ariel.
All right, guys, let's start. Of course, we have to start with Jon Jones. And there's a simple question that we have to ask right off the bat. Did the UFC make the right call by stripping him and suspending him indefinitely? Of course, we've seen suspensions before, but we've never seen them do something like this to a champion after what he got into, that car accident allegedly Sunday morning of this past week. And of course, he's been charged, not convicted, but then they come to Albuquerque and strip him of the belt. Was it the right call?
Well, one thing I'd say before that is we haven't seen something exactly like this, but we've seen recently that the UFC is being more reactive to these things. In the case of Rumble Johnson, in the case of Thiago Silva, where they've been quick to suspend and then kind of come back on it and reassess after the legal proceedings are taken care of. What I'd say is it depends on who you ask, who's involved in the situation, whether it was the right thing to do. For Jon Jones, I'd probably say it would have been prudent to wait for the legal proceedings to be finished and then see where it falls.
Yeah.
For the UFC, it's a brilliant move. It's a great PR move to get out in front of it and say, we're going to punish this person for doing something wrong. Whether it's in the cage or not, there's still morality clauses and all kinds of things to take care of there. He's the face of the company for all intents and purposes, him, Ronda Rousey. So it's the right move PR-wise, but it also creates great storylines, just to be frank about it. Like, you know, the idea of Jon Jones being like an exiled champion and then coming back and winning back his title, they've set themselves up for a fantastic storyline. So whether it's in his best interest or not, it plays out well for the UFC.
What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to say it's the right move for everybody. You know, Eric laid out what made it a good move for the UFC. And in terms of nothing else, they're public face. I mean, people are the line about the UFC always has been, oh yeah, sure, if you're ranked number. Well, if you're unranked, you're just some guy at the bottom of the card and you do something wrong, they're gonna crucify you. But if you're one of the top guys, I mean, I think in this SI story I did this week, I mentioned how their favorite mixed martial arts move is a slap on the wrist, and that's kind of what has happened in some cases with the top guys in the roster. Well, there's nobody higher on the roster than Jon Jones, so for them to do this sends a message not just to Jon Jones but to everybody that you know you can be the champion, you can be number one pound for pound, but you know you gotta watch what you're doing. I think also that while I agree that ultimately the courts are going to have their say, and that's something that's down the road, I think that the UFC does not also have to abide by the same way the courts go. And I think this is ultimately a good thing for Jon Jones. He needed something pretty dramatic to maybe just wake them up. I mean, I think the guy needs to grow up, and this is certainly an impetus for that.
I don't think UFC had much of a choice, really. I mean, was it the right thing, the wrong thing? I think it was the right thing, but I don't think they had a choice. He put them in a spot that's not a spot that they want to be in. And if you look at everything, the way they're going, you know, from a Fox deal to the Reebok deal, they're trying to clean up that sport. And having your champion, the biggest star, facing felony charges for whatever may or may not have occurred, no one really knows still, right? Everything's alleged.
Sure.
You don't have a choice in that case. You have to suspend him. And if you look at the way, you know, every other sport goes, NFL, Adrian Peterson, Ray Rice, suspended immediately, you know, indefinitely until proceedings have occurred, and then they go through the court cases, and then, you know, Adrian Peterson's back, Ray Rice is reinstated on the team, and I think possibly their thinking is along that same lines is you have no choice. We have to suspend him. We have to do something because we can't, you know, like you mentioned, the PR hit. You can't have that hit, and you have no choice but to do that.
Well, the NFL did screw up the Ray Rice thing initially, right? They only gave him 2 games, but then they figured it out along the way. What I want to know is, and we'll never know the answer to this question, if this was Jon Jones's first offense, would he have been stripped? You know what I mean? Because it's bad in itself. I mean, to do what he allegedly did, and that's hit someone in another car, pregnant lady, breaking her arm, and then running away. Not only running away, but running away and then coming back and then running away just to get some money. That, to me, you can make the case that that is a, fireable offense, an offense that should lead to a suspension, should lead to being stripped. If it was his first time, if he was squeaky clean, if he had the reputation of, say, a Ronda Rousey or Chris Weidman, right? Nothing on their resume as far as infractions. Does he get stripped?
It's hard to say. It's hard for me to imagine Jon Jones having that squeaky clean image. It's almost like we're trying to rewrite.
But is it a 3 strikes and you're out situation here?
I think that I think the cumulative damage was done. And I think that unlike the court system, I think the UFC did take into consideration, the 2012 DUI and the cocaine metabolites in January and all that stuff. But I think that there's this kind of irony. This is really how I got into the story I did for SI.com. Was the irony is that the whole mythology of Jon Jones began with him running from a crime scene. That there was this that was right before his big title fight when he beat Shogun. That morning all we heard about was him going off and like a superhero crime fighter going after a guy who had robbed somebody and he ran and ran. Now he's alleged to have done something that looks sort of similar, but it's very different, and so it's kind of almost like coming full circle, but in the wrong direction. It's like he's again, it's all allegations, but it seems to me that the UFC, they went down to Albuquerque. They brought their 3 top executives down there to hear his side. They probably didn't hear too much because it's a pending court case, but they probably heard enough to make them believe that he was there and did something.
I have to believe that it would have played out the same way. Just because of the environment we're in right now and the nature of it. Now, certainly, it doesn't help to have that past, but I think that this is an offense that, if he did what was alleged, is pretty bad. And as I said earlier, that they've kind of been leaning in this direction as they've been, growing as a company, and we're looking at them in 2015. In the past, obviously there have been some things that have happened that weren't treated the same way. Rampage Jackson, for example, when he had his legal issues. But I think that in 2015, in the environment, the way the media covers this constantly, the Jon Jones stories were just nonstop, and I think that they couldn't have that right now.
That's actually a very good point. Just wanted to jump in. I hope that they didn't go to Albuquerque. There were a lot of calls for him to be stripped, right, from very powerful media members. I hope this was their own idea. I hope they didn't do it because they didn't want to take the PR hit. I don't know, and maybe we'll never know the answer to that question. But sometimes when powerful media members, you had people from like Kevin Aioli to others saying he should be stripped, that's impactful. I mean, they have an influence on the way people think. I hope that this was their idea and they didn't say, look, we're gonna take it on the chin here. We might as well do what's being called for elsewhere.
I mean, I have the utmost respect for Kevin as a journalist, but I don't imagine that the UFC is going to go about their business based upon what he or any of us would say. Also Kenny Florian, your colleague on UFC Tonight, which I thought was a pretty ballsy thing for him to do on a show that purports to be very connected to the UFC. So I thought it was really great that Kenny did that. But I think that it was their call. I mean, I think once you saw the picture of the 3 top executives from the company going to Albuquerque, you almost sort of knew the end of that story. Because if they were just going down there to talk to Jon, it probably would have just been Dana White going down there to talk to him. But once there's 3 guys, you knew that that was going to be the case. But I think you sort of needed all the ingredients of what allegedly happened. Mm-hmm. If Jon Jones was involved in a car accident, even if someone was injured, that's not enough. If Jon Jones was involved in a car accident and there was a pipe with marijuana in the car, well, maybe some people would say that's enough. But the fact that he then allegedly ran away from the crime, and it was like the perfect storm of mishap, really. A pregnant woman injuring herself. I mean, this is just nothing. It could not. Well, I can't say it couldn't have been worse because it could have been worse.
He's very lucky.
You saw the pictures from there. It could have been a lot worse. But that it definitely reached the threshold when you combine all those things together, where you just couldn't go on with the guy.
I think you have the snowball effect. First of all, in that story, it seemed like every time a new story came out, there was a little more information. He's in the car accident. Now the woman he hit is pregnant, which is just oh. If it was just, that just adds to it.
Sure.
It adds to the outrage even further.
And then she breaks her arm.
And then, he leaves, and then you have the marijuana found, according to the police report. And the question is, what's he doing in a rental car? That's the question that has me curious. I don't know enough about the situation, obviously, but that's intriguing to me. But to go back
Why
to
is that intriguing to you?
what's he doing in a rental car? I got to assume the guy, if you look at his, if you follow the Instagrams and social
Sure.
media, there's plenty of cars that he's got floating around.
Yeah.
What do you need a rental car for? But I don't know.
In your hometown, or at least you know.
I'm a guy who has one car, so
I do believe, and I'm actually pretty sure of this, that it was under his wife's name, the rental car. I don't know if that makes you feel less suspicious about it or whatnot. But yeah, I mean, sometimes people have their cars in the shop, and they give you a rental car. I guess there are different. Look, Jon's reputation allows us to ask these questions, right? Because he had the DUI with, 2 other women in the car, because of the cocaine. He's opened himself up to this kind of criticism. Were you at that press conference at UFC 128 in Newark when he won the belt? Were you at that show? Were you at that show?
I was at, yes.
Were you at that show?
I was a fan.
You were a fan. A mere fanboy, if you will. Remember when he was recounting that story about taking, and it always kind of struck me like he was trying very hard. He was trying to put on, but, and you guys may have seen it, I tweeted out this video of Dana White talking to me afterwards, and it's amazing. It was like he was looking inside a crystal ball. He nailed it. And he doesn't say those kind of things when Ronda Rousey wins the belt. He doesn't say those things when Chris Weidman beat Anderson Silva. What was it about Jon Jones on the day he took down a mugger, the morning of the title fight, that Dana White felt the need to say, now's the interesting part, now's the tough part, now we'll see how he deals with the leeches? What was it about this guy that made him say that?
What is it about Jon Jones what was the most notable thing about that victory? It was that he was the youngest champion in UFC history. So I think that he was playing off of that in a sense. I mean, this is a guy who was 23 years old, but kind of a 23 in a kind of a young sense. I mean, Jon Jones, when you really, not to become an armchair psychoanalyst here, but when you think about Jon Jones's history, I mean, he's a great athlete, comes from a superb athletic family, 2 brothers in the NFL. One brother at the time was in the NFL, one was on his way. Jon Jones, he gets his girlfriend pregnant. That kind of changes the direction of his college career, where he was going to become a great college wrestler, perhaps, and who knows what else. But then he goes out, and so he suddenly, at a very young age, was given a role of responsibility, and then he becomes a world champion where everything's given to you. And it's so, when I wrote in my last story that I thought the biggest thing for Jon Jones is to grow up, I wasn't thinking of it in the pejorative, like, grow up kind of thing. It was more just almost in a literal sense. This is a guy who's 27 years old, but just seems to be acting in a way that somebody who's a college kid or just out of college and has no responsibilities and just kind of whatever, hey, I'm just going to go party. This is a guy who has 3 children and is or was a world champion, but just really needs to grow up some.
I think it was also the excitement of the event specifically, that Jon Jones was this person who was being groomed for a title shot and then got thrown into a title shot and defeated what many considered the best light heavyweight in the world at the time, and didn't just do it by squeaking out a decision. He beat him up pretty badly. So there was an enthusiasm and an energy around that title fight specifically, and Jon Jones as an athlete that I don't think is comparable to somebody like a Chris Weidman or a Ronda Rousey. It just feels a little bit different. That they had the proper progression, they moved up, and then they got their title shot, they won. But Jon Jones felt like he was this young kid who was getting a shot. Let's see how he does. Maybe this will be a future indicator of how he could do in a future title shot if he gets another one. And he just, did it in aces.
It's such a shame, though, because I think sitting here right now, he is the greatest fighter of all time. I think his resume is better than any's in the sports history. What he did, during that stretch from UFC 128, up until maybe the Chael fight, he was fighting a murderer's row. I mean, it's unbelievable. Former champions, legends, Hall of Famers, and I think we said it after the cocaine thing. We said the only guy that's really going to beat this guy is himself. And is he going to cut short his legacy? And now he has 2 blemishes on his MMA record. The Hamill fight, which he didn't deserve to lose, and now this, which he did to himself. It's amazing. I mean, near perfect as far as fighting is concerned, but he continues to do this to himself. Do you think he's able to rebound? Is this the moment that he sees the light, or do you think that it gets a whole lot worse before maybe gets better?
I definitely think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I mean, we're all talking about it in the fighting realm.
Sense, yeah.
There's a whole, legal, penal situation that has to go through here, and I think I remember reading that the penalty is up to 3 years.
Correct.
Imprisonment, I think it is.
If they actually charge him, which they haven't done.
Well,
so
he's
yet.
been charged. He hasn't.
Excuse me. If
he gets convicted,
yes.
If there's an indictment,
Right.
You know, a maximum of 3 years. That's no joke. I know in the media world, and even just looking at it in general, you see an athlete or a celebrity get charged with a crime. They'll get off to do some community service and 6 months probation. There's no indication that any of that kind of stuff's going to happen or not happen. So it's definitely going to get worse before anything gets better. Can he come back and resume his career as good as he can? Of course he can. I mean, we all love second chances, right? And
Sure.
this is a guy
That's
who
a point we'll talk about in a second.
has an absurd amount of talent that we've already seen. And we always every time you watch him, like, well, what's he going to do next? He's still on a rise. He still hasn't peaked yet. Right. So the question is, where does he come from? You know, how far does he fall, and then how quickly can he rise back up?
Yeah, I was just about to touch upon exactly that, which is let's separate the outside the cage stuff for a second. Inside the cage, people want to see Jon Jones overcome. It's been relatively easy for him. He's never looked really that much in danger. And if these are the opportunities that are presented inside the cage purely, for him to show his toughness and to overcome, the Gustafsson fight was one that we've gotten. That was pretty much the only one. If coming back, he's not champion anymore. He's the challenger now. He's going to have to face, let's assume, the winner of Rumble and Cormier. You know, we don't know when he's coming back. That could be further down the line. The belt could change hands. But let's assume it's one of those guys. There's a great storyline there, and it would be new for Jon Jones. And I think people would identify with that and rally around him, to be honest.
Well, the sentiment is already starting to grow, because I saw yesterday when Reebok jumped off the ship and then they took him off the rankings, people were starting to say already, like, come on, this is a little too much now. Like, they're already starting to feel bad for him. America loves reclamation projects. They love the underdog. And I think one of the best things that could happen to Jon Jones, honestly, is Daniel Cormier winning that belt, because it will piss him off so much. And you know, him and Rumble have a nice relationship. You know Daniel is going to rub it in his face. He's already calling it my belt and things like that. That might be the thing, and who knows how bad his problems are. I mean, maybe he has troubles that we can't even imagine at this point. But if it's just, he just needs to get sober and just get on that right path. Daniel Cormier holding that belt on May 23rd if he wins, and it's obviously a very tall order. Rumble is a great fighter. I think that could be what really, sets him up as saying, okay, I need to. That's the fire that I need to clean myself up, because he hates that guy.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, we're switching, we're moving the inside and outside the cage, and we're separating them. I don't know that there's anything that's within the MMA realm that is going to clean up his overall life and have him grow up. I think that the idea of him being pushed aside and losing his income and all that, I think that certainly is a thing that's going to help him in the long run. But I will say that I think that this is an opportunity for him to you asked about whether his legacy is forever tarnished. I think that this is an opportunity for him to rehabilitate that in a way that he might not have otherwise gotten. I mean, I think for him to come back, if he comes back and becomes as dominant, resumes his dominance the way it's always been, would be amazing, because by that time it'll be a whole different narrative. There'll be somebody else. Let's presume that this takes a little bit of time, and whoever wins the title next has a couple of defenses and has smashed somebody and is looking pretty dominant. And if Jon Jones comes in there and just destroys him as if it was a little blip on the radar, that'll be pretty amazing. So he has an opportunity to still maintain that greatest of all time.
He's still very young.
Of course.
He's 27.
But this is a big thing. This is not a matter of a little setback inside the cage. This is your life, and there's a lot going on. Who knows what's going on, in his home life, his family, his kids. I mean, there's a lot of people around him who right now are hurting, and as is he. And is that going to tear him down more? Or is he going to grow to the point where he can rise up and bring it back inside the cage and give it everything he's got?
See, I think that's where the maturation process has to start, is at home. He's got 3 young daughters or 4 young daughters. 3, yeah. They're all like 3, 4, 5 years old. They're young. He's a huge source of income for the family, and that's gone.
Yeah.
Right? I mean,
all sponsors essentially.
Sponsorship is gone, which is standard fare. And nowadays, Tiger Woods, Lance Armstrong. Within an hour or two of their police reports are coming out,
right.
The sponsorships are going to drop. But you got to look at family life. You hope there's money put aside, because no matter what happens with this case, he's not fighting again in 2015. I mean, I don't think that's, even if the charges are thrown out, remember, he's still suspended indefinitely.
Yeah.
So those guys, Lorenzo, Dana, Lawrence Epstein, they all have to decide that this guy is matured and he's changed and he's ready to come back. Not just wait. I mean, maybe they do wait for the court case to end. What do we know? We don't know what they're going to do, right?
Right.
But there is still that, there is that hurdle that he has to clear with those guys to get back before anything happens.
There's the saying, heavy is the head that wears the crown, and I'm wondering, I want to get your take on this. I feel as though as far as champions are concerned in sports, I feel like you can make the case that there's more pressure on the UFC champion than any other champion in sports. Because if you're the Super Bowl champion, the NBA champion, you're part of a team, and sure, Tom Brady gets a lot of attention, and LeBron James will get attention, but you're still part of a team, and you already have all that attention leading up to the point. LeBron James will get a lot of attention if he doesn't win the title this year, and Brady the same, and all the other stars, Sidney Crosby, whatever. But when you become the UFC champion, and right now there are 10, but there used to be a lot less. When Jon Jones was champion, there was a lot less. It feels like you are now separated from the rest of the pack, and you're in that gym, and there are a bunch of guys there who might be on the prelims. There are a bunch of guys there who might not be in the UFC, guys who are making 2-2. There's a huge separation now, and now all eyes are on you, and all the pressure in the world is on you, and everyone's coming after you. And I really feel like we've seen in the last year that the UFC's champion's head is really heavy when he's wearing that crown. Look at what George St. Pierre said when he walked away. I can't take it anymore. Look at what Anderson Silva said when he lost to Weidman. I don't want the rematch. I'm done with this belt. And look now at Jon Jones, how he's acted, especially in the last 4 or 5 months. It's really opened my eyes that, man, there's a lot of pressure on these guys because there's so few of them. In boxing, no one cares that Floyd Mayweather is the WBA, WBC, WBO ring mag. No one cares about that. It's all about, really in boxing, you could be, in my opinion, beltless. But if you're the biggest draw, getting the biggest fights, that's what people are buying. But in the UFC, and of course, it's not the same with Jon Jones and Demetrius Johnson. I get that. But I really feel like, wow, these guys go through a lot, and some of them just don't know how to deal with it. And some of them, like Ronda Rousey, appear to deal with it great. She had her moments too, right, on The Ultimate Fighter. But what do you guys think? Is that a fair thing to say? I mean, there's more pressure on the UFC champion than maybe any other champion in sports.
I think the big difference there is, aside from team versus individual, is all the team sports are seasonal. So you spend the whole year getting to win the Super Bowl. You win the Super Bowl, you go to Disney World, and then you're done. Take a couple weeks off, let everyone else talk about your next contract and then the draft and your off-season workouts and who they're going to bring in to replace this guy. And they don't care. But the fight game is year-round. It's in some ways non-stop. Granted, the champ only fights 2, maybe 3 times a year if they're healthy. So I think that has a lot to do with it.
And he can wear that crown for like 5 years.
Right.
And it starts to wear on you, I would imagine.
I mean, look at Cain Velasquez. He's been the champ. He hasn't fought since, was it 2013?
October, yeah. 2013, yeah.
That's a long time, but everyone still recognizes him as a champion, even though you're not on TV every week. So I think that's a big difference that speaks to your point as to, the pressure that these guys have. You're always a champion until you're not. And it's not like there's I'm going to come back next season and defend my title.
Good point.
I'm going to come back in 3 months. I'm going to train for the next 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, wait for the next guy, and come and defend my title again.
Yeah, I don't know that I would agree that there's more pressure on a UFC champion than other top elite athletes, because I think that mixed martial arts, the show goes on a much more dimly lit stage than, say, what Tom Brady goes through or LeBron James. Those guys, even though Tom Brady is only one of many players on the Patriots, when the Patriots lose, it's Tom Brady. And when they win, it's Tom Brady. And LeBron is the same thing. And so if you're a superstar athlete in the 4 majors, really the 3 majors, baseball, basketball, football. Those are the ones.
What's your beef with hockey?
I love hockey.
What's wrong with you?
I love hockey, but
you think there's pressure on Carey Price's shoulders right now?
But hockey doesn't have the same. It doesn't have that same spotlight that the other sports do.
Have you been to Canada? Have you been to Montreal?
Yeah, I have.
There's a lot of pressure on these guys.
Yeah, up there.
All right.
It's great. And I would rather go to a great, the Stanley Cup, 7th game of the Stanley Cup than any of the other things. But those are the ones that are under the real spotlight, And but the UFC champions, there's been a lot of ups and downs for all these guys. A lot of times it's just injuries. We haven't seen the same level of personal issues that's going on in Jon Jones's life. And look at Ronda Rousey. You brought her up. I mean, this is somebody who at a very young age, was thrown into the judo system and was competing at a very high level internationally, and then went to the Olympics. So she kind of has grown up in that sense. She's grown up and learned how to deal with this kind of celebrity and this kind
but
of.
she had her moment. Remember the Ultimate Fighter, all that pressure that she had. She kind of, she stopped doing social media, and remember,
But that was smart. That
was
was
smart,
self-
but it seemed like she had to maybe grow up a little bit. And could you imagine Tom Brady saying, "I don't want to win the Super Bowl next year"? You know what I mean? And we've heard this now from UFC champions. I don't want that belt.
Didn't he say that before they played the Giants those 2 times?
You won't get me to say that a UFC champion has more pressure on them than, like, let's say, a LeBron James or a Tom Brady, just because of the spotlight, as Jeff mentioned. But the key difference, in my opinion, is that everything in a UFC champion, in Jon Jones, for example's life, leads up to one moment. There's this one fight on one day versus one opponent. That's all I've got. That's my sole focus. In other sports, you have reps. You have a regular season. You're getting to see your opponents, frequently throughout the season. You have a playoff system. It's best of X number of games. You get acclimated to it. Whereas these fighters, they're in their training camp wondering whether my training is going to be good enough, and then they get to that moment and they have to perform and they have to shine on the biggest stage. That's a lot of pressure to be thrown into on that one night and say, now this is for the belt.
Yeah.
It's a completely different, and I could see how that would drain somebody mentally. It's a completely different system.
Let me ask you this, Jeff. Are we to blame? Is the media to blame for what has happened to Jon Jones? Because I know I've said this before, I'll own up to it, and I know we've had this discussion on this show before. Embrace your heel, be the bad guy, and we've really ramped that up as of late. And I see you smiling over there, I know you love that. But I mean, look what happened to him in the last 6 months, right? Cocaine, this. I mean, maybe he started to listen to us. Maybe he said, I can be a bad boy and I can get away with it. Are we to blame for some of these troubles?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, the media's to blame for everything. Really, it's
That's a good
whatever
point.
it is. Let's go, whatever's going. No, I mean, I think that the media definitely plays a role in really in all sports. Some of the ills that happen in all sports. There's media involvement because the people who cover the sports are part of the fabric of it, and so we emphasize certain things and we de-emphasize other things, and that certainly plays an impact. But I don't think that the situation with Jon Jones is something that is, it's in here. I mean, there's nobody outside of him who, I mean, even that wonderful interview you did with Dana White that you talked about earlier, and he was prophesizing what Jon Jones had to watch out for. Well, yeah, there might be all the Klingons, as he put it, all these people, all the barnacles who were clinging upon Jon Jones once he became at the top of the mountain. But that happens. That happened to other people too. But if you've got something in here, and if you have that, whatever it is, that fortitude, that heart to lift yourself up and get away from it, then you're going to. So it's Jon. It's his thing.
The media, what we do is we help shape a narrative. That's it. We tell stories, we shape a narrative. Pretty sure no one told him to do anything that
Maybe he
has been
started to
reported
drink
that he's
our
done.
Kool-Aid a little bit, I don't know.
That's his digestion issue then at that point.
People want him to play a bad character or a villainous character. They don't want him to be a bad person.
Sure.
And
at least just be himself.
Yeah, or be yourself. And if that person is a more flamboyant character and you're entertaining, great, the better. If you talk a lot of smacker about your opponent, better. But nobody's campaigning for him to be a bad person, obviously. And I think that I don't think he would necessarily take that to heart. But I can't really.
And who are you going to be if you don't really know who you are? Then what role are you willing to play? So again, I keep veering into that psychoanalyst role with Jones, but just watching him perform, watching him do those things where he'll tweet something out and then erase it, or do these kind of like things where people think, well, you're not being real. I think he actually is being himself, but the person he is somebody who's not quite sure of what the right thing to do is because he hasn't really grown up.
Yeah. It's all part of the maturation process.
I mean, look at when I think it was also on UFC Tonight when Demetrius Johnson was on, and someone asked him, what was your advice for Jon Jones? And it was just simple. It was just something about forget all this other stuff. You've got a family, cling to the family. That's where you find yourself. And Jon Jones, luckily for him, he has a family. He grew up in a very religious religious family and household. You know, I'm not a big organized religion person, but I think if you grew up in an environment where there's some piety there, that's something to cling on and somewhere to go when you're in bad times.
You know, Mark, sometimes I feel like when an athlete gets in trouble, maybe it's just best to go away, figure it out, and then come back to the media, do your interview, all that stuff. But in this case, I actually feel like the sooner the better for Jon Jones. And I'm not, by the way, campaigning to get that big exclusive. But what I mean by that is, you know, he did that interview with Fox Sports 1 a few weeks after the cocaine bust, and everyone was kind of just rolling their eyes, like, really? This didn't feel genuine. That's been the problem with Jon for quite some time. One has to imagine that he feels very bad about what happened. What he did to himself, what he did to that lady, I hope, losing his belt. You know how much it meant to him to be, you know, the king of the hill. And I feel like if he could do an interview right now and allow the world to see how sad he is and how emotional he is, and hopefully, you know, how regretful he is, that might do him some good. That could all play into, hopefully down the line, the comeback story, the underdog story. You know, if you're in charge of his career, would you try to set that up now, or do you think go away?
Oh, absolutely. Go away.
Go away.
Stay, hide. In the culture we live in, just based on the saturation of media and avenues that people can find stuff, we don't believe anybody when they say anything anymore, whether they feel genuine, whether they look genuine or not. You're not going to believe them unless they admit something and say, yes, this happened. I did this, I did this, I did that, I did that. Then you'll believe it. I mean, if Alex Rodriguez gives an interview now and says, it was a bad time. Okay, yeah, great, fine. But if he comes out and says some stuff that, you know, that is admission of things, then you start to feel better for him. But there's the whole legal issue here.
Yeah.
You know, and any lawyer, legal advisor, any guy worth his law degree is going to say, shut up, do not say a word, you have a pending litigation. Anything you say can be used against you, whether it's in, you know, I mean, we've read enough complaints and affidavits and things where you see they'll pull quotes right from your interview and say, this is what he said here. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at the one tweet that he put out, very vague, and you can go many different ways with it. And I think that was almost intentional. I would not be, I have no knowledge of this, but I would not be surprised if that was approved, the wording that was used there in advance.
I don't think this is a time for Jon Jones to speak. I think this is a time for him to listen, and listen to himself, really. And maybe listen to some trusted people in his life, not his lawyers, not the UFC, but people who might be able to give him a little bit of, a little bit of a life lesson. I mean, I was actually interested in seeing a couple of fighters who tweeted things that were, I think they were linking to longer things, and I thought they were really great. One was Ken Shamrock, who's a guy who's had a lot of ups and downs, and I thought what he wrote was really beautiful. And the other was Michael Mayday McDonald, who also has, you know, didn't get the same degree of fame as Jon Jones, but certainly was a young guy who shot up the rankings and then, you know, had some difficulties. You know, Jon, aside from the legal issues, he can't sit down and do an interview and talk about what happened or what didn't happen, what allegedly happened. If he starts talking about that, the legal system is going to eat him alive. But that aside, I also just don't know that Jon right now knows what he would say.
And I don't want to trivialize this. I want to ask you this question. I don't want to trivialize it, but is this a good week for the UFC? You know, I said at the top it's a bad week. Is it a good week for the UFC because they finally stepped up to the plate and did what everyone asked them to do, right? Act like a real league, suspend him, strip him of the title, stuff that they wouldn't do in the past. This week in particular, the biggest week in the history of combat sports. I mean, the money would 100% back that up. The money that's on the line on Saturday night in Las Vegas between Pacquiao and Mayweather, everyone's there. I mean, the media that's there, you turn on ESPN, every single one of their shows are in Las Vegas talking about this boxing match. It's unprecedented stuff. And then I'm seeing a lot of UFC talk as well. I saw Dana on Sports Nation, you know, with Kellerman and Michelle Beadle right after they were talking. I mean, UFC is part of the discussion, and it's a bad thing that happened to a UFC fighter, but the UFC is getting a lot of praise. So is this the week where when everyone's talking combat sports, the UFC kind of grew up a little bit?
I mean, yeah, you laid it out perfectly. It couldn't have been better from that perspective. You know, obviously, Jon Jones is a separate matter altogether. But for the UFC, yeah, they did what many people didn't expect them to do. Many people expected them to wait and kind of see how it plays out. And they took a progressive step and got out in front of it. And people are rightfully, you know, praising them. I just want to go back to the last thing for 1 second and just say that Jon Jones speaking now would be the only time we might actually get something real out of Jon Jones.
That's why I
think that this
advocating for it.
If there was any time for Jon Jones to speak, it would be now. Now, a whole slew of lawyers are going to try and prevent him from doing it. But if we ever hope to ever get behind the curtain on Jon Jones, now would be the time.
Yeah, and the more he waits, you'd have to imagine that there are going to be a lot of people in his ear telling him, say this, don't say that. So that's why I want to see the real Jon, because I think the real Jon is a good guy at his core. He just has made these mistakes, hasn't grown up, and I think people would get behind him then.
But to return to your question, as you laid out, it's great for the UFC right now.
What do you think?
It's hard for me to think of a week in which you lose your pound for pound number one fighter and to call it a good week. I think that the UFC
But it's about how they responded,
certainly
right?
the UFC
They
had
didn't
a
do
good,
this.
certainly had a good response.
Right.
But if you're looking at, is this a good week for the UFC? No. And then you also add on, they also lost another fight from that card.
Yes.
Khabib Nurmagomedov is injured and can't fight Donald Cerrone. That's actually why Chuck Mendenhall's not here. He's training for the Cowboy fight. So just be watching out for that. You lose really two fights. Now they did rebound. They had a really great response. They also got what in some ways could be a more appealing main event because Jon Jones, as we said earlier, has been just mauling everybody. And who's to think that he wasn't just going to go out there and maul Rumble Johnson? But Daniel Cormier, as good as he is, I just think that matchup is not quite as much of. I'm not going to call the other one a mismatch, but this is a much closer to even matchup. It's a fight that I think.
How do you feel about the belt? Does the belt feel like it's been devalued? Because to me, it feels like Jon Jones' shadow is still hanging over it, and I want to see the Cormier rematch or the Rumble fight where Rumble's the champion. I thought I was going to feel like it was devalued, like the interim title. It doesn't feel that way to me.
No, it's a real belt. I mean, the guy who was wearing it dishonored himself, and the belt is gone. It's no longer Jon Jones' belt. I mean, I heard Cormier say this on UFC Tonight, and I know that he was saying it for his own benefit and all that, but it's true. He doesn't have the belt now. Of course, if he comes back, and if he comes back in a year and fights whoever happens to be wearing that belt at that time, probably he'll be the favorite over no matter who it is. But no, he's not the champion.
So UFC 186 took a slew of hits, and we thought, all right, well, forget about 186. We got 187. 187 is such a great card. And then, obviously, earlier this week, we lost Jon Jones. And now we lose Khabib Nurmagomedov. And this is a growing problem for the UFC. People buy tickets to these shows. They get excited. And then the fights don't end up being the ones that were advertised, the one they bought ticket for, right? I mean, this is a real problem for the UFC. Is there any way around this?
I'm sure there's always a way around something, right?
I don't think there is. I think it's a real problem that they're going to have to deal with forever.
I definitely think it is a continuing issue and one that you're not going to solve in a short amount of time. I think from a pay-per-view standpoint, that's a little easier because most of the pay-per-view buys are day of. In all pay-per-view boxing,
sure.
They'll project, $300 million revenue from the Mayweather Pacquiao fight. Most of that, the 99% of that's going to come Saturday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, right before the pay-per-view. So I don't think it affects the pay-per-views as much, but certainly
the people who bought
the people who buy the
flight,
tickets.
right,
Yeah, those guys. I almost think at this point though, if you're a fan and you've been a fan of the sport and you've followed it, you see what happens. You have to be a little more reserved.
But it's a crummy feeling when they announce these tremendous cards, and you think, well, let's just wait a second and find out what's going to happen.
All the pay-per-views that have been announced. I mean, the 187 was the one that everybody circled on the calendar and said, okay, I'm going to fly to Vegas for that one. I think that the local markets. I mean, the one up in Montreal last 186. Well, the card was falling apart, but if you're from Quebec, you want to see the UFC, you're going to go see the fights. I mean, it's
but Memorial Day, Vegas. There's a lot of people traveling. To that show,
I think that's
a killer.
I think the cards in Vegas, where people are traveling, that's a different deal. The ones where they're in some locale where you're going to get a lot of people from that location, and you don't have to worry quite as much about airplanes and hotels, but you just want to go see the fights. They'll survive on that.
I have a solution. It's crazy. Bear with me.
Okay, let's hear it.
Scale back the number of shows so that when something does fall off the card, you can replace it with something.
Well, because now
decent.
you have Cerrone, who has no logical opponent. Does he just wait for the winner?
Every time there's an injury, it comes back to the number of shows because they have to spread themselves so thin throughout the year.
Look at Ryan Bader. No logical opponent as well.
It happens every time.
What do you do with Cerrone, by the way? Anything come to mind? there's nothing that really comes to mind. If you look at the rankings, there's really nothing that makes sense for the guy.
I don't think he really cares. He just wants to fight. I don't
Yeah.
care who.
Anybody.
Yeah,
that's
out of reflex.
Bader
As soon
seems to
as Khabib dropped out of reflex, Cerrone texted Dana and said, "I'll jump in and replace." And he realized he was the opponent. So
Very good point. And by the way, I love the Khabib trash talk as much as the next guy, but you need to scale back now because now you've been gone for a year. I mean, like you see that you see that tweet from Anthony Pettis saying,
Well, wasn't he criticizing Pettis for being out for so long, and now he's the guy who can't stay healthy?
Let me ask you about your boy Chris Weidman. Do they need Chris now more than ever? In the sense that this is a guy who appears, I think what we see is what we get from this guy. This is a guy who can be a representative, can be a role model. He's been injury hit a little bit, but I feel like they should be pushing him a lot more. This is the guy who took down the greatest of all time, who later on tested positive, right? This is the kind of guy they should push. And I feel like sometimes they don't do it as much as they should.
I'm sure anyone in this camp will tell you the same thing. They definitely, why wouldn't you not want that push? It's interesting because, coming in here today, I'm thinking, all right, everyone's talking about Jones, Cormier, Johnson triangle, now Khabib, Cerrone. At no point this week at all.
It's amazing.
It's almost like you didn't even see in the stories like, and by the way, the middleweight championship is also being contested on that same card. No one's talking about Weidman Belfort right now.
Nobody wants to. I don't want to mention that guy's name because I'm afraid it will jinx him.
There's a bit of a whammy, but and I obviously I've known Chris for a few years now. I've covered all his fights. The one thing I can say, to this day is he's been the exact same guy since fighting in Ring of Combat in like 2010, whatever it was, 09. To now as the champion, the same exact guy, and he's the All-American, the great nickname. He's a clean-cut guy. He's a guy you can easily push and sell that, and you almost wonder in a way like you said, why aren't they doing that? Obviously, I have no idea.
Sure, he's undefeated.
I'm not
he's
a marketing
New York guy. There's so much there to work with. His interviews have gone better.
Yeah, he's gotten 100% more comfortable. I think what would happen is let's say we're in New York right now, right? So if MMA comes to New York and he's at the Garden, I think you'll see a huge push, and you'll go from there.
And I got to say, as much as I liked some of Chris's performances in the cage, when he was cornering Vellante at that last fight, when Vellante scored that knockout, I've never seen Chris Weidman move like that. That was like, if he could do that in the cage, he would be like, he looked like Anderson Silva the way he was jumping around.
He gets very excited when his boys, when he's ringside to Iaquinta, you'll see the same thing. Yeah. Eddie Gordon, when he won the Ultimate Fighter, he was jumping up and down, but obviously in the corner, I think.
But it's real. It was real.
Yeah.
That's dragging us back to Jon Jones. This is a real guy, and if you want to sell a guy, you're selling a guy who's real. You can't tell Jon Jones, okay, we need you to do this. We need you to be the heel. We need you to do this. Weidman is Chris Weidman. I've never met the guy personally. I've talked to him on the phone, but every time I see an interview, he's the same guy, and that's something to be said for him.
Yeah, they need Chris, I think, now more than ever.
Now we're just jinxing them.
They need Ronda Rousey, and where have you gone, George St. Pierre? I think it would be such a huge boost for them. We saw him in Montreal. They would say they need him. I don't know what he thinks, but you don't want to see him back.
No.
But they need him, right?
He
they
walked
need
out.
him now.
He walked away.
Sure,
dropped
he did.
the microphone.
He did.
Walked away. He is.
I feel the same way, but you can't argue that they don't need him.
Well, look coming in here today, I rode right past Yankee Stadium. Last season was the great farewell tour of Derek Jeter, and the narrative was that Armageddon's going to come when Derek Jeter takes the glove off for the last time. The baseball is going to disappear from the face of the earth. Well, guess what? Derek Jeter, end of the season, rode off into the sunset, and the Yankees are still playing baseball. The UFC is still operating without George St. Pierre. George St. Pierre was an all-time great. He retired he walked away. He hasn't officially retired, but he walked away when it was his time to do so. His decision. He didn't get suspended. He didn't get stripped. Nothing disgraceful happened to him. He didn't get badly injured where he couldn't fight anymore. He walked away a healthy champion. You can't get any better than that.
Okay, before we go, I want to quickly touch on Mayweather Pacquiao because I think this is a fight and a sports moment.
Mayweather what?
It's boxing.
So let's go to you first. I saw you say something hypothetically. Is it okay to stream this or illegally stream it? considering Mayweather's past. Are you really considering that?
No, I don't do that. But it was hypothetical. It was a moral dilemma. You've got, on the one hand, stealing is wrong, and if you steal a pay-per-view stream, you've just committed a crime and you've done something morally wrong. However, if you pay for it, you're putting money in the pocket of a person who is a serial wife abuser, spousal abuser, domestic violence, all that. So do you want to put money in the pocket of a domestic abuser, or do you want to just not do that? So I was throwing out a hypothetical for all the deep-thinking fans out there.
You don't even think it's the biggest sporting event of the day.
Have you ever heard of Churchill Downs?
Yes, I've heard of it.
Saturday, Kentucky Derby.
Is that even a sport?
Oh, come on.
Horse racing? Come on. It's not a sport. You really think that this once-in-a-lifetime fight...
American Pharaoh in one corner, and you could have both Manny and Floyd in the other corner, and I'm taking American Pharaoh.
If they were happening at the same time, I know one's shorter than the other, you're watching the Kentucky Derby.
Yes.
That is crazy talk.
I'm not paying. They don't have to pay $100 for it. I don't need $100.
I know, but let's just say
I don't have to pay $100 for it.
And you're not into the
American
fight.
Pharaoh has never touched a filly.
He's never
lifted a paw against the filly in his entire life, in his 2-year life.
Okay, gotcha.
No, I am into the fight. I'm into the fight, but I'm not into the spectacle surrounding the fight.
The spectacle's the best part.
No, because it's not about, like, what have we actually heard from Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather?
Yeah.
It's more media covering media. It's essentially everybody talking about how many reporters are there and how much money is generated.
Interesting.
It's not.
media
I want to
members.
see the fight.
Our man Luke Thomas has been great following his Twitter feed. It is like following. He's just amazed at the spectacle of what's going on.
Well, they're very awkward around each other. I don't know if you saw the stare down. Like, they don't know where to stand. They don't know where to look. It's a very weird dynamic that they have. But I can't get enough. Like, I'm reading everything. I'm digesting everything. How do you feel about it?
I've been all in since they announced it.
Yeah.
You know, when they first announced it, I was running the newsroom. I'm like, we're running. Let's go, put a story up here really fast. Just get some stuff up. Then they go, oh, it's May 2nd. Oh, that's gonna be a big day. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on that day. But the excitement of, you know, you talk about the hype and stuff. If you look at it though, it's really not. They've done nothing different than what you would do for a normal fight. There was one press conference beforehand. They had the one open media workout the week before, 2 weeks before the fight week, and now it's fight week. It's just that everyone is. You know, I always say, like, there are two boxers that my parents know their names who are active, Mayweather and Pacquiao. You know, those two guys are fighting right now.
Right.
You know, the two guys, two names that you could go up and down the street and say, list 5 boxers. Everyone's going to tell you Mayweather and Pacquiao, and the other 3, one's going to be Rocky, the other one's going to be Apollo, and the third one, maybe they'll throw in a Klitschko, who knows?
Maybe.
You know, so there's an excitement that everyone knows these two names, whether you like them or not. You know, whether you like this guy, hate that guy, it's a great narrative of good guy versus bad guy.
Oh, it's perfect, right? Although
Mayweather's
kind of flipping the script on us. He's so nice this week. I mean, he's almost too nice. It's weird. Like, I want to see him throwing the money, saying this guy's a phony. You know what I mean? Like, Pacquiao's inviting him to have a Bible study session afterwards. That part is a little weird, but I love the spectacle of it all. And I've never subscribed to the idea that boxing's dead. I think that's silly. I think that's a very lazy thing to say. And if you say that, you're not really paying attention. But to see them on the cover of Sports Illustrated, to see all the shows that are in Vegas, to see the world talking about boxing over anything. I know there's a draft, which I think it's the most overrated sporting event on the calendar. I hate the draft. I despise it. Please wake me up when it's over. But to see everyone talk about that over the silliness of the draft, over the silliness of horse racing, is pretty amazing. Wow. No, it's a pretty amazing thing to see for long-time combat sports fans.
It is a spectacle. I mean, I'm joking about not wanting. I don't know that I'm not going to pay $100 for it. I'll find somebody I know who will probably pitch in. I'll want to watch the fight. You know, you have to. If you're a fan of combat sports, how could you not want to see this fight? I was alive for the last fight of the century. I was a little kid.
Wow.
But I remember very much.
That is amazing.
This is how I was a little kid. I remember listening on a transistor radio. It wasn't even to like play-by-play. It wasn't even getting like the voice of Mauro Ranallo, you know, telling me what's going on. I was like, oh, okay, we just got a report from the second round, and Frazier knocked Ali down. You know, it was just.
I wish I could have lived to see that.
Yeah.
Or been born for that.
I remember that.
You remember where you were?
Well, I remember I was a little kid, so I was like in bed, and I had to sort of snake the little transistor radio. You don't even know what a transistor radio is? You don't.
Is that on Twitter?
It's like an old thing. I had to sneak the little radio in my room, and even though it was it was a Saturday night, so it wasn't like a school night, but still, you know, I was a little kid. I wasn't able to stay up late.
I never would have made it. I never would have been a UFC fan back then. These fight cards end after midnight. I never could have seen one.
Mayweather fight's not going to start till after midnight.
Will the UFC in our lifetime ever have a fight this big?
No.
No, I don't think boxing even will again.
Unless it's a rematch.
I mean, to me, this is on par with the Super Bowl. I know it sounds crazy.
I feel like it's bigger.
I mean, obviously you don't have the $4 million 30-second commercials.
Right.
But from a sporting event standpoint, I'd be shocked if this had less searches than Google searches than the Super Bowl. I don't think you can get a bigger fight. I don't think the only big, like if you put LeBron James and Tiger Woods in some kind of sporting event against each other that wasn't a cheesy made-for-TV thing, then maybe you could match it somehow. But I
don't even think that does it.
Yeah, the UFC, the closest they could have had, you had a chance with Silva GSP. It wouldn't even match it.
Sure.
But that's, to me, I think is as big as you could have gotten at this point in time. I mean, maybe 20 years from now things are different, but the fact that it's Mayweather and Pacquiao, the two names that everybody knows, I mean, I'd be surprised if half the people didn't know their first names. You know, it's Mayweather Pacquiao.
Sure.
And one of them's Manny.
And I know a lot of people were upset that it took this long. I think that the delay has made it even better and bigger. I don't know if it would have been.
I mean, I think as a fight,
with social media now, with the money built up,
as an event, yes. Yeah. But as a fight, I think that Pacquiao. I'm a little surprised. Pacquiao has suffered 2 losses in the time since this was supposed to happen.
One's
5
a
years
fake
ago.
loss.
One was a fake loss, but the other was not at all
knockout,
fake.
Yeah.
And so, if this happened 5 years ago, I probably would have spent the $100. But now I'm like, okay, I want to see it, but I'm not willing to do it. I also didn't know that much about Floyd either.
Also, Floyd's transgressions were
I mean, that makes a difference to me.
Absolutely.
I will not
100%.
spend $100 when I know that a good percent of it is going to go in his pocket. I just won't do it.
Fair enough. All right, guys. Great stuff. Great job. Great to have you back. Great stuff. I like the hair.
Thank you.
And you look great as always.
I brought a hat just in case.
In honor of Jazz Fest, right?
Absolutely. Jazz Fest starts today for the second weekend.
But
Great stuff.
the most important Jazz Fest actually isn't in New Orleans. You know that, right?
I've been to both.
You've been to both?
I have.
Montreal.
Yes, it's wonderful.
It is wonderful.
It's not as good as New Orleans, though.
Really?
No.
All right. I'll have to check it out. Well, that does it for us. You got a little bit of everything on this show. A little boxing talk, some jazz talk, and of course MMA talk. A very busy week for the UFC. We'll be back next week to talk about who knows. I mean, wow, it's like every single day there's some mind-numbing news coming out of the UFC or MMA in general. We'll be back. Can't wait for that. For now, we say goodbye. For Mr. New York Rick, Jeff, Mark, I'm Ariel. Thank you so much for watching. Enjoy your weekend. And if you're watching Mayweather Pacquiao, enjoy it as well. We'll see you then. Take care.